Prime Minister Modi's historic visit to Brunei, followed by Singapore. The visit comes at a time when India is pushing the pedal on its ASEAN outreach and its Act East policy. This comes also at a time when China has also been deepening its engagement and has had historically deep engagements with all of the 10 ASEAN countries. This is the first ever bilateral visit by an Indian Prime Minister to Brunei, where defence, trade, space and healthcare are said to be the key focus areas. Brunei is also a very crucial partner for India, as I said, in the Act East policy, and this upcoming visit scheduled from tomorrow is set to strengthen cooperation in all these existing sectors between the two countries. The discussions are likely to focus on cooperation also in newer sectors, and there is also semiconductors that could be a key area of convergence between the ASEAN countries, particularly Singapore and India. The visit comes as India and Brunei mark 40 years of diplomatic ties, and while Prime Minister Modi will be at these two countries, he will also engage with the diaspora in both of these countries. This visit comes at a time when he's already engaged with the countries and heads of states of Vietnam and Malaysia, indicating that the government is pushing the pedal when it comes to all the ASEAN countries and sets the agenda for what lies ahead. All right, let's first get in a reaction from the Ministry of External Affairs. We come back and talk more on that.
As you know, Prime Minister is undertaking a visit to Brunei and to Singapore. He is traveling to Brunei at the invitation of His Majesty Sultan Haji Hassan Al Bolkiah, and the visit is scheduled for 3rd and 4th of September, and after that he will travel to Singapore at the invitation of His Excellency Mr. Lawrence Wong, the Prime Minister of Singapore. And that visit will be over 4th and 5th of September. This will be the first ever bilateral visit by an Indian Prime Minister to Brunei. On hydrocarbons, we have been importing hydrocarbons from Brunei, and in the long run we would like to have more predictable supplies, with longer term contracts from Brunei, especially in the area of gas, in which we see that India's demand for natural gas will increase many times in the near future. So that is an opportunity for the Brunei side to lock in long-term gas supply arrangements if they wish to do so.
All right, Professor Harsh Pant, Director of Studies and Head of the Strategic Studies Program at ORF, joins me along with Professor Chintamani Mahapatra, who's the founding chairperson of the Kalinga Institute of Indo-Pacific Studies. Thank you, gentlemen, for taking out the time and speaking to me on India Global. Essentially, there are three legs to this conversation that we will have today, which is about the trade ties, the strategic aspect of this visit, and of course specifically around energy and defense. And let's take that one by one. Professor Pant, starting with you, sir, in terms of this outreach, it comes at a time when if you connect the dots, it is essentially a larger engagement from a strategic point of view for the Indo-Pacific, for the ASEAN countries from New Delhi.
Thanks, Gaurie. I think, Gaurie, something very interesting is happening. For a very long time, and we have been saying that, we have been repeating it as a mantra that, look, ASEAN centrality is at the heart of India's Indo-Pacific outreach. And of course it is. ASEAN is very, very critical in terms of India's Act East policy, India's, engagement vis-a-vis East and Southeast Asia. But what I think you are seeing now is somewhat of a disaggregation of India's ASEAN policy, that India is also now looking at individual countries in terms of their own bilateral relationship, in terms of their own heft in the region, and in terms of what they can deliver for India. So I think when you look at what India has done in the last few months, in fact, Vietnam, Malaysia, Philippines, now Brunei and Singapore, I think this is this was long overdue, because ASEAN itself is coming under significant strain because of the pressure of great power contestation. You have China's rise. You have disjointness within ASEAN itself. And now, as India looks at ASEAN and India looks at its own Act East policy, it has to recognize that not only ASEAN is critical, but I think looking at individual countries, mapping out the bilateral trajectories individually is also important. And therefore, these relationships are becoming so very critical, and India is putting in an extra bit of effort in sort of sharpening the edges. Of course, Singapore has been a long-time partner.
Yes.
But look at what we are doing with other countries, and that I think is the larger mapping of India's foreign policy in the region, which is quite significant.
Absolutely. Professor Mahapatra, you want to come in on that and also weigh in on the fact that, there is the other view as well, which is that New Delhi seems to be now playing catch up to some extent. Yes, we've been deepening our engagement, and as Professor Pant said, yes, in the last fortnight itself, we've played host to Vietnam, Malaysia, and of course building on this as well with Brunei and Singapore. But this comes at a time when China does have very deep trade and strategic interests and engagements with ASEAN countries. How do you see now New Delhi from here on? And some would say, is it now catching up with Beijing?
I don't think that we are catching up with China. I don't think that we are trying to compete with China as far as ASEAN is concerned. The Chinese have been involved in Southeast Asia for a longer time than India. Of course, we are not looking at history. During the Cold War time and the post-Cold War time, the Chinese, because of their financial capabilities and trade and investment interest, they were deeply involved in ASEAN countries. Relatively, we are a late comer. I see it in a different way. India is trying to enhance its footprints in ASEAN countries. We engage with ASEAN as an institution by signing free trade agreement. We have Indian ASEAN summits taking place almost every year now. But individually, maintaining ties with all the countries, big and small, is very, very important. We have a long relationship with Indonesia and Malaysia and Thailand and Philippines, but now Singapore and Brunei being smaller states, India is trying to also say that India is giving more importance to its relationship with even small states, which are otherwise critical, very, very important. So I look at it as India's part of Act East policy, India's Indo-Pacific strategy, and enhancing relationship with smaller countries with the same doctrine of Sagar, or security and growth for all.
Right. Now, let me come to the trade aspect of these relationships. Professor Pant, weigh in on that as far as the trade relationships, we have a very deep relationship with Singapore, but we are also building in with some of the other nations, Brunei being one.
Indeed, and I think you were showing this response of the Secretary East to one of the queries about hydrocarbons, etc. I think the recognition is that unless India leverages economic ties with the region, and the point that you earlier posited to Professor Mahapatra, the fact that China is so important today is because of its economic linkages with the region. China is so integrated. Each member of ASEAN individually, as well as ASEAN as a group, is so integrated with China economically that now, it has almost become impossible to think of a strategic posture in the region without investing in the economic dimension. And therefore, for India, it is very critical that it engages seriously on the economic question. We know we are late. We know I think India, is not part of, for example, economic relationships in the region like RCEP, for example. We moved out, we walked out, and that has put us in a slightly more of a difficult position. So we need to build on our economic ties to have the strategic influence that we need in the region, because other countries want us to do that.
Professor Mahapatra, on the defense aspect of these ties and visits, how do you read that?
India and Singapore have very deep defense cooperation, including naval exercises. Brunei is also a defense partner for quite some time now. And India and Brunei have cooperation even in the space sector. And India, has begun to improve its defense and security cooperation more actively, more openly with many ASEAN member countries, particularly the Philippines and Vietnam, even offering to sell weapons. We have sold weapons, BrahMos missile to Philippines. The Vietnamese and the Indonesians are negotiating. And even Singapore and Brunei are very, very important defense partner. This relationship has to be improved further. Now, smaller countries like Singapore and Brunei are at the moment slightly getting, getting into a dilemma because of the US-China competition and rivalry.
Yes.
A country like India with a growing profile and emerging global player, the smaller countries will feel more comfortable to build up ties with a country like India,
Yes.
which is not having any kind of rivalry with any country anyway. So I think this is very important that India is reaching out to these countries on defense and security matters, joint training, and even sharing of
Absolutely.
intelligence, holding exercises, etc.
Absolutely. I have to leave it there. Professor Pant, Professor Mahapatra, thanks so much for speaking to me on India Global.